we use filler words a lot, and they're normal, and they're not bad grammar, and they're not ignorant, and they don't mean that you are stupid or uneducated. They're a normal part of human speech. Welcome back, friends. We are once again diving into the human brain, and today we're going to be talking about filler words. So recently, I saw a post online asking about like something that when you see it online, you always laugh and it always you always find it funny. And I said, my fart cone, because it is a post, and I'm sure that my wonderful producer will bring it up because I provided him with a link. But basically this person meant to say, oh, I left my phone in my car. And they almost said, I left my cone in my far, which would have been embarrassing. So thank God what they actually said was, my fart cone. And it always makes me laugh. So I love when like people switch sounds around, and that is known as a disfluency, which we're going to talk about. And disfluencies also include like filler words, slips of the tongue. So we're just going to kind of dive into the silly things that our brains do when we are trying to process a lot of words at a time. Because speech, pretty complicated. Our brains have to recall the words that we want to say, the sounds that make those words, and then we have to get them out in the right order with all the sounds in the right place. And so when we are perhaps tired or really excited or just like distracted, we tend to misfire. We'll call it a misfire. There's also like TikToks and videos and stuff of people who like they get stuck in like these little loops. Like this one girl was trying to tell a story and she started trying to say once upon a time and it came out once upon a pine. And she just kept repeating it. Once upon a pine? Once upon a pine. And like she looks panicked. And I would panic too, because I would be like, am I having a stronk?
Once upon a pine, once upon a pine, once upon a pine, once upon a pine, once upon a pine.
You know, Bond names the James Bond having a stronk is a really funny one for me too. So we're gonna cut in hopefully some funny TikToks for you, and we are gonna talk about linguistics a little bit. Firstly, we're gonna talk about the fact that when I started my podcast, back when it was called Run Like Hell Toward Happy, that was the original name for it. I spent a lot of time editing out all of my filler words. I didn't want you to know that I ummed and ahhed and hummed and liked. I also cut out my breathing. Like, no, you cannot know that I breathe. That's illegal. I don't want you to know. How embarrassing is breathing? My God. So now you get hiccups, you get tangents, you get me completely losing my train of thought because, you know what you signed up for. You know why you're here. So in the 5 years that I have been recording my podcast, I have really unclenched the beehole around being perfect when I deliver words. I am a person. I talk like a person. This is a very casual podcast. I'm not trying to give a perfect public speech, right? I'm not here to win any awards. I'm just here to talk to my internet besties. And so I'm going to talk like a person. Y'all are used to it. Gorgeous. So then I decide, okay, I'm going to look up filler words and we're going to do a little bitty deep dive on why we use them. And if your childhood was anything like me, your mom and your friends' moms hated when you were like. And this is also something I noticed. I watch a lot of Smosh Reads Reddit stories. I love Smosh. Found them in 2020, right as the COVID lockdown started. And I was like, no, this is quality entertainment. And so now I've been watching Smosh for 6 years. Jeez, man. Okay. My life is different than it was 6 years ago. Crazy town. And something that I see in the comments of the Smosh Reads Reddit Stories videos is people complaining at how much they say like and And that's because they're not delivering lines. They're talking. They're having a conversation. And it's very normal to use filler words in verbal conversation. They are used to indicate that the speaker's not done talking. You know, like if you need to pause to think, but you don't want to cede the floor, you give like a, it's And this now indicates that you're not finished. So people will wait for you to finish, or sometimes they will help you. So saying or can indicate that you're having trouble finding the right word. And we're going to talk about that because there's science there. And they may also be corrective. So you might say like, oh yeah, this guy came up, he was wearing a black hoodie. And so we use filler words a lot, and they're normal, and they're not bad grammar, and they're not ignorant, and they don't mean that you are stupid or uneducated. They're a normal part of human speech. And in fact, there's even like a filler word in American Sign Language. Most languages have words that are used as filler words. In conversation, up to 20% of the sounds that come out of your face hole may actually be filler words. And there are some other words for them. It might also be called a filled pause, a hesitation marker, or a planner. So a hesitation marker, that one makes a lot of sense, right? Filled pause, planner. It's something that indicates I'm putting a little doorstop here. I'm coming back, but I need a second. So, okay, now we have covered the fact that filler words are totes normal. Okay, love it. Yes. And then I want to talk about once a ton of pine. So that is known as a spoonerism. And that is when you switch up like the sounds. So like a consonant sound, you swap it. Like a very common example is people will say bass backwards to mean ass backwards. And that's sort of like a fun way to like get around using a curse word, right? One time I was literally in a department meeting. This is when I worked at a greenhouse, and we frequently talked about plants in the categories of succulents and foliage. Succulents and foliage. Now, if you can extrapolate data based on where this conversation came from and the words I just said, you can probably guess that I said the word fucculents out loud in a department meeting with our brand new manager. Fucculents. Anyway, it's perfectly normal. So why does this happen when we get like the sounds all mushed up and garbled and we say things a little bass backwards, if you will? And this is because our brains are planning what we're going to say while like it's still pulling the words. Like before the words leave our mouth, the brain has a plan. And so if we are fatigued or stressed or excited or multitasking, distracted, anything like this, sometimes the brain get the words out in the right way. And so we mix up with sounds, and it's kind of freaking funny. I personally love it when you can't quite find the word you want. And so you say a word that's like close. That's called a malapropism. I'm not really going to get into that here. But another one of the TikToks that I am sending my producer is this woman who has an avocado in her hand, and she can't come up with the word avocado. And so like she calls it banana, apple, banana, plum. And just the way she says it, she's so frustrated. And she's just staring at this avocado in her hand, and she goes, plum. And she's so angry.
I just don't understand how people can find like cute bananas, apples, ripe, banana, plum, avocado. My goodness, I can't.
So that's a spoonerism. And you can look up why it's called a spoonerism, because I don't want to take all of the joy of etymological discovery from you. So go look that up, and you will get to microdose one of my special interests, which is how come it's called that? I fucking love that. I fucking love that game. Why is it called that? What are we doing? What's that? Etymology. Not to be confused with entomology, which is the study of bugs. But then if you wonder why bugs are called what they are, that's like both. But I'm not going to try and make a portmanteau of it because I'll mess it up. So what about pauses? Pauses are when we need to think of something. And so we stick a little filler word in there to indicate like, I'm just pressing pause. I'm not pressing stop. This is not an invitation to jump in, although some people do. There we go. I'm going to be like super hyper aware of it now because I'm doing this episode on filler words. So when a filler word pops up, I'm going to be like, oh shit, no, I did it. But remember, Caitlin, it's normal. It's totes normal. So the word usually comes before a difficult word or an infrequently used word. And we unconsciously know this when somebody says So there was a study, and once again, I got this from a Psychology Today. It's a story or like a little article by Hans Rutger Busker called, Well, you're saying more than you think, which 10 out of 10 title. I'm obsessed with that. And so I'm just going to read you an excerpt from the article here. Imagine you're having dinner with a friend at a restaurant, and there are 4 items on a table: a knife, a glass, a napkin, and a wine decanter. Your friend turns to you and says, "Can you hand me the, what would you assume they want?" Since it is unlikely they would hesitate before such common words as knife, glass, or napkin, chances are you will look at the decanter, pick it up, and ask, "Did you mean this?" And that is a thing that our brains do. Our brains are little predictive machines. So researchers explored this. They presented people with 4 objects on a screen, and then there were narrated verbal instructions. I said like. Like is used when you are approximating things without specifically citing and referencing. It's all good. So when the instructions use the word such as click on the participants tended to look at or hover their mouse, or however they were measuring this. They looked at the lowest frequency objects. So, if it had a fork, a knife, a napkin, and a decanter, would make people go for the decanter. So we naturally tend to assume that an is preceding something that they don't frequently use or talk about or work with. Fascinating. However, if the instruction speech was heavily accented, like a non-English speaker, non-native English speaker was saying the words, that prediction that it's an infrequently used word goes away, because the subjects, not really test subjects, right? I don't know. The participants. Here's what the article says. Anyway, I remembered that it's in my notes and I copied verbatim. It says, presumably, this is because listeners assume non-native speakers may have as much trouble coming up with the English word for a common object. So if you are not a native English speaker and you we have no idea what you're going to say. You might say fork or cat, or you might say decanter or, I don't know, thumbtack. You can kind of notice it when somebody has learned another language, and say you're speaking Spanish with say you're speaking Spanish with me, right? I know I have a grasp of Spanish, but because I have not studied Spanish in a long time, I was a Spanish major in college. I fucking majored in this language and I have lost it. I'm rusty. It's frustrating because I don't use it a lot. And so, I can say, hola, ¿cómo estás? ¿Dónde está el baño? ¿Dónde está la biblioteca? All your classics, right? But if you were to ask me for directions to a specific place, or you wanted me to ask the librarian about an encyclopedia, I don't know that word. It's gone. It's gone from me. I may have known it once, but I don't remember a lot of Spanish words. So if I say or este, that's a Spanish one, which just means this, but it's used as a filler word. There's no way of knowing what I'm reaching for. Is it an infrequent word because I do know some Spanish, or could it be any frickin' word because I really don't know? I'm not fluent in Spanish. Could go either way. And another, however, they then took this a step further and had the speaker in a native English speaker. So remember, our baseline is that we're going to choose the object that is least frequently used. We're going to choose the weirdest, most out there, rarest thing when somebody says because we assume it's something that they don't reference often. But then they switched to a narrator or a speaker providing instructions using atypical patterns. So they would use before common words. And at the beginning, the would still trigger people to look for the rarer objects. But as their time with this narrator, this instruction giver increased, they started looking for the simpler, more common objects because that matched the linguistic cues that they were getting. In conclusion, from the article, these findings represent further evidence that the human brain is a prediction machine. We continuously try to anticipate what will happen next. I love it. It's so tasty for me when I'm yes, this is why the brain does this. And, maybe that's why I'm a psychology major. Maybe that is why I studied the brain. It regularly occurs to me that I go around assuming most people know how brains work like this. No, they don't. People don't care how their brains work. They're just living their lives. And so me, a psychology scholar, I don't know. I majored in psychology in college. And for most of my life, that has felt like a nothing major because, I didn't go into psychology. I didn't get a clinical counseling degree. I didn't become a school guidance counselor. Like, I'm not doing anything, quote unquote, with my psychology degree, except doing this podcast and teaching you guys about brains. That's pretty relevant, in my opinion. So there's that. Psychology. It's how brains work. So why do we slip up? Because our brains are loading up words really fast, like 2 to 3 words per second when we are talking to somebody. And so, like I mentioned earlier, we're trying to pull 2 or 3 words a second and execute all those sounds properly. And sometimes they get messed up. Sometimes they scramble, and that's just part of life. Now, stuttering and disfluencies and slip-ups like this, they can indicate like a speech pathology issue. They can be like a language impairment. See, is it and I had to think of the words because it's a specific phrase I wanted. It's not the most peaceful life, constantly metacogniting about everything that your brain is doing, but it is an interesting one, and you can quote me on that. And then there's also like a Freudian slip, right? So people think, oh, it's a Freudian slip. It's when you're saying something that like you really mean or something that divulges a secret desire that you have. Like, okay, Freud, we do slip up, but not everything is about like wanting to fuck your mom. So you win some, you lose some with Sigmund Freud. He was very focused on sex, and not every linguistic slip is going to be about that. Something that has happened as I have like aged, right? So I'm now in my late 30s. I am approaching 40. And sometimes I freak out and think that like I have early signs of dementia because I will mix up my words, or I'll be typing and it's like my fingers move faster than my brain and it's all jumbled and it's words that I know how to type. And sometimes I'm tired and sometimes I am distracted and busy and I'm trying to like listen to something while I'm typing. That actually happens a lot. Like say I'll be texting Jess and my partner says something to me about like, let's get ice cream. And so then I'll be texting Jess and I'm like, hey, when's your vacation to ice cream? That's normal. That's just your brain being on 2 tracks. We try to do a lot of things in modern eras. Used to be we did like one thing at a time. What a peaceful way to live your life. Sometimes I also like can't come up with the right word that I need. And it'll really, really, really frustrate me because I have always been hyperlingual, right? I learned to read when I was 3. My parents left me for the weekend with a neighbor who was babysitting me while they went on like a trip somewhere. And when they came back, the neighbor was like, Katie can read. And they're like, yeah, like, she follows along in the books that we read her. And she's like, no, like your 3-year-old took my shampoo bottles and was reading them out loud to me in the bath. And so my parents are like, oh, okay. Turns out that's an autistic thing a lot of the times. It's called hyperlexia. Fun. As I grew up, I really always prided myself on my vocabulary. My dad always used big fucking words with us. He did a lot of brain teaser type things. Like he would do like spoonerism punchlines to jokes. I can't think of any right now, but I'm sure I will eventually. Maybe I'll put them on Instagram or something. Who knows? And I've always been really good with language. I've always gotten great grades on papers. I've always been really, really skilled at getting my point across in a way that is clear and makes sense and honestly is beautiful. Like I'm a good writer. And then I burned out, and the executive functioning that I could dedicate to having my linguistic shit together has fallen apart a little bit. I now have to conserve that executive functioning energy on other things, like going to work and doing the things I need to do, right? Take my dog out. Remember that I have to give my dog her pills in the morning. Like the more complicated your life gets and the more things that you need to keep track of, the less you can devote your entire psyche to having the best word for that situation. And that's just a thing. That's just a thing that happens. I have struggled with it though, because I thought it meant I was losing something, some part of my identity. I was losing something that made me feel special and good and smart, but I haven't lost it. I just need to be more selective about when I bring it out, right? I don't need to say, man, I can't even think of like any kind of word to use here, but it's fine if I just use like more basic words. That's allowed. In fact, it's very normal. some people think that you're being pretentious when you use bigger words. And I'm like, no, I just know that word and I know that it fits specifically in the space left in this sentence and it is more accurate. But that's like, if you see a feelings wheel, let's put a feelings wheel here. Like the center of the feelings wheel has things like sad, mad, happy. And then the further out you go, the more detailed and specific the feelings get. So like under happy, there could be contentment, but there could also be elation. And those are very different, even though they are both happy feelings, right? You feel me? So I'm a person who likes words. I like to eat them up. I like to keep them in my mental dictionary. And I like to bust them out at the perfect moment, which is whenever there is a that word shaped hole in a sentence. And that's one of the things that makes me weird. And that's fine. So let's talk about weird brains, autism, ADHD, how that interacts with language. And I'm sure that you will be very surprised to know that there's not a ton of comprehensive study on disfluency and neurodivergence. Long story short, there's something going on, but we don't have a lot of study on it. And there are usually some issues with the studies that we do have, like no control group, or like, once again, most of this research is being done on white boys. And like, there's issues. It's not perfect, but we are going to talk a little bit about some of the research. So first up, let's talk ADHD. There was a study, which is more of like a kind of I'm not doing this as an example. I'm really trying to like a meta-analysis, really, really robust like literature review on what's already been covered and then like where the needs are for more. So love a meta-analysis. That's my jam. I could probably do that. That would be a great job for me. They'd be like, hey, Caitlin, read these 10 studies and then tell us the through line. And I would be like, hell yeah, put me in a room, turn some music on, leave me alone all day, and then I will give you that. Dream job, honestly. So, estimated 17 to 38% of children with language problems also get diagnosed with ADHD. So like that's a decent overlap. But again, studies on ADHD and speech pathology issues, disfluency, overall like language development are a little lacking. So we have Bangert et al. And et al. Means there's more people here, but we're not listing them all. In 2020, examined disfluency production in children with ADHD aged 4 to 13 during narrative and conversational tasks. So basically like talking and seeing the patterns that emerged in how often there were disfluencies, etc. But there was not a control group. Okay, I feel like that's pretty basic, but whatever. Bangert et al. Did not have a control group. What they found, and what needs more study with a control group, is a higher rate of revisions compared to filled pauses and repetitions. So that indicates that kids with ADHD are kind of talking faster than their brains are like filling in the correct details. And so they'll say something like, oh, it was it was a red hoodie, I keep going back to the hoodie. So they do more revision than pauses, right? And waiting to fill in the word, or repetitions where they'll say like, my dog, the dog, our family's dog went for a walk. The repetition is a different type of disfluency, and the filled pause, the filler word, etc., is a different kind of disfluency than revision. And then there is a higher rate of filled pauses in conversation compared to narrative. So if these kids are trying to like recount a narrative story, more likely to revise or repeat. But in conversation, they do the filled pause more. And that to me says that when we are organically speaking, people with ADHD have a higher rate of like filling the pause and being like, and searching for the correct word when we're talking to somebody. But if we are supposed to be delivering something, we don't do that as much. And I wonder if that's because it's been trained out of us as bad public speaking, or if it's just something in our brains. But we don't know. And there was no control group. Please get a control group, banger. Then we have Lee et al. In 2017, analyzing speech disfluency characteristics of children with ADHD symptoms. So not necessarily a diagnosis, but symptoms. And typically developing children. So this is a little acronym. Typically developing, or TD, is being used instead of like neurotypical. It's called typical development. These kids were aged 6 to 9, and they were studied during reading, describing a picture, and retelling a narrative. So overall, the ADHD group produced more disfluencies than the control group. The ADHD group had more disfluencies during narrative story retelling than during picture description or reading, which, and this is a verbatim quote, which suggests that participants were more vulnerable to a speaking task that places greater demands on their attention. So that tracks, right? The more they have to pay attention, so specifically recounting the details of that narrative, similar to what we saw in Bangert. Like the more attention and the more sort of like, the more there's a correct answer. Oh, see, that was a correction, a revision rather. The more there is a correct answer to be found, it seems the harder it is for kids with ADHD to fill that in without the disfluency issues. The study also did not include executive tasks, so the impact on that executive function that emerged, right? Thinking, okay, so maybe it's that they need to focus their attention more on this. We didn't do anything to measure that. So that is needed in further research. And then just related to the executive, see, my brain, it went too fast. Related to the executive functioning thing was Tannick and Shocker in 1996, which their conclusion was that conversational difficulties may be a clinical marker of executive dysfunction. So since the 90s, at least, we have been connecting conversational difficulties and disfluency with executive functioning issues, which definitely says ADHD to me, a professional. Not a professional psychologist, but, one day I could be. Another thing that's funny is while I was doing this research, of course, I went and looked up PhD programs in clinical psychology or whatever, because I can't resist imagining getting more education on something so that I have a credential, so that I feel more qualified to talk about it. And then I'm like, that sounds hard and expensive. I can just read some books and learn. I'm fine with reading books and learning. Self-taught is still taught, y'all. Self-taught is still taught. And let's get into autism. So how do disfluencies show up in autistic children as they are developing language? This study that I am going to pull from and reference is called Quantitative Analysis of Disfluency in Children with Autism Spectrum Disorder or Language Impairment. So this group, or this study rather, grouped children into autistic, language impaired, and typically developing. So the idea here is your typically developing group is your control group, and then you have autistic and a language impairment. So we're seeing, is this just any issue versus typically developing, or is there something unique to autism or unique to a language impairment, right? Science. So quoting here, previous studies have found that speakers with ASD differ from typically developing speakers in the types and patterns of disfluencies they produce, but fail to provide sufficiently detailed characterizations of the methods used to categorize and quantify disfluency. So their issue here is, well, these studies are saying that autism and disfluency overlap, but there is no consistent way that we measure that. And so you got to take all that research with a grain of salt. So they propose a more simplified method of classifying disfluency for easier tracking between these different groups of kids. So they studied 115 children aged 4 to 8. 89 were boys. So it's not ideal. It's still mostly boys. Most autism and ADHD research is in boys. Most medical research is in boys and men, right? They just started testing period products with actual blood. Okay, women are not a priority in healthcare, in health research, especially in America. Hooray! Love it here. Land of the free, home of the brave. So they did experimental tasks, and then they assessed the kids with cognitive, language, and neuropsychological assessments, about 2 to 3 hours apiece, 6 sessions. So these kids had to sit through 12 to 18 hours of being assessed, which I'm sure was really awesome. Poor babies. The autistic children did show that they had different patterns of disfluency compared to their typically developing peers or their peers with language impairment. So we have now identified that there is something different in the autistic brain about language development and disfluency. So our autistic subjects here had a higher rate of content mazes, and we haven't even talked about mazes. I'm sure that you can imagine what it is, though. A content maze, very frequent in our ADHD world, is where you like start a story and then you start going around kind of in a circle. You maybe hit a dead end, and so you try and come back this way. And you either finish your content maze or you give up and you start over. Sound familiar? If it sounds familiar, you have ADHD. Love you. The autistic kids also had a lower rate of filler use. And that, I think, may be part of why people say that autistics don't use social cues properly, because the use of filler words is itself a social cue. And if we're like, well, people should just kind of wait for me to be done, and they don't know that they can signal that with an or an or an ah or a like, that's going to feel kind of arbitrary. Again, with autistics, you have to explain the why behind it in order to get buy-in to something that seems like an arbitrary rule. So now that we know the is not arbitrary, and also it's not being trained out of us, right? Because the instant an adult is going to tell an autistic kid, don't say or it makes you sound dumb, or whatever it is, they are now going to integrate that into their next software upgrade and not use those filler words. And then when people do use those filler words, the autistic kids are going to be like, oh, your mom's going to yell at you. You're going to get in trouble for that. Basically, at the end of the frickin' day, we need to quit telling kids that developmentally appropriate things are bad, especially if those kids are autistic, because they're going to internalize that, and then they're going to end up in their late 30s with a fucking podcast talking about linguistic development. Okay, do you want this for your autistic child? Do you want them to be on YouTube? Brenda? I'm mean mugging Brenda for those of you on the audio only version. Those words didn't come out right, but I'm just going to roll on past it. So my thoughts on this research, and because I love you, I did not go super frickin' in depth on every piece of research I could find. I just picked a couple because I value your time and I need to keep it funny. And if I'm digging too deep into science, I'm going to lose the funny. So I think that we are just beginning to scratch the surface here on understanding how ADHD and autism differ in their processing and development of language. Disfluencies are normal. They are expected in typically developing children and in autistic, ADHD, any other neurodivergent child. Filler and disfluency is normal, but the differences in how they are expressed, I think, can give us the shape of something that we can learn more about. I think we can learn more about how the disfluencies are used. We can isolate parts of them that are innate versus parts of them that are socially enforced. And I find that fascinating. This is now the point where I'm PhD in psychology, because I can't be freaking stopped. I just want somebody to pay me to info dive all day, to be I'm just going to go down a rabbit hole of research. Money, please? That'd be my dream. I love that. If anybody wants to sponsor that, please let me know. Moral of the story, if you stutter, you mix up your sounds, you just kind of give up in the middle of a sentence when your brain and your mouth are not on the same page, you're not broken. You're not stupid. You're not uneducated or ignorant or anything bad. You're just normal, and your brain is making sounds with your mouth to communicate to other people. That's pretty damn cool. It's pretty damn cool. All right, I'm going to leave us there, friends. I love you. I will see you next time. We have some tasty changes coming to the podcast that I am not ready to divulge yet, but it'll be coming soon. Okay, I love you. Bye.
They'll change your approach and tell you a joke to lighten your load and help you along, or sing you a song. Do-do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do.